And this is John Bernhardt with a message to the speakers. You are able to see the screen at this time?
I don't see it, John.
I don't see it either, John.
No, I don't see it.
Okay. If you don't see it when I click this button, just let me know.
There it is.
Okay. Yep,
Okay,
it's up.
Okay.
All right, and we've still got about 3 minutes to go.
Right. And we should be ready in just a few minutes. We have people that are coming on board, and
yeah,
I'll open the audio bridge as well as necessary. I don't think I need to do that. I think the audience is probably hearing us right now, so I think we're good to go.
Okay. Well, for those of you that are here now, I'll officially start in a few minutes, but my name is Kathy Tabor. I'm the Executive Director for the Center for Campus Fire Safety, and we want to thank you all for coming. And I can see that this is quite a good-sized webinar. We have this is a joint webinar that the Center for Campus Fire Safety is doing with APA. This is the first one. We have another one scheduled next month, and you'll soon see notifications about that as well. I'm just going to wait a few more minutes just to let the last few people come in, and then I'll officially start.
And this is also John Bernhardt from APA, and I might ask any of the audience members just to make sure that we do an audio check on our bridge. If someone would be so kind as to just send us a quick question in the question box on your screen, just to confirm and indicate that you can hear the audio portion of today's presentation. If someone could take just a moment to do that, we'd appreciate it.
I can see it. Quite a few people can hear.
Very good. Thank you.
All right. So I think we're in good shape. It's 1 o'clock, and I want to say hello to everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar. My name is Kathy Tabor. I'm the Executive Director for the Center for Campus Fire Safety. Today we're going to be Roger Reiswig, the Vice President of Industry Relations for Johnson Controls, will present on low-frequency sounders and NFPA 72. And you'll also hear a little bit from John Bernhardt and Justin Daniels, our Board of Director and Fire Marshal for the University of Oklahoma. I'll turn this over now to you, Justin.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. The next slide is just a little information about the Center for Campus Fire Safety and APA. I'll let John talk about APA, but if you're on this broadcast, I assume that you're familiar with the center, or you've at least heard of the Center for Campus Fire Safety. We are a national nonprofit member-based organization. We have board members of our board that come from all across the United States, from California, Oklahoma, Texas, and from the Northeast, really from all over. We have lots of training programs. We have our annual forum, which will be coming up this November. We also have a library of online resources that are free because we're a nonprofit organization. We allow free access to that information, and there's quite a bit of it there. We also provide news regarding fires from campuses all across the country, and we also do webinars like this in conjunction with APA, or host some of our own webinars as well. So, John?
Thank you, Justin. It's John Bernhardt. I serve as the Associate Vice President for APA. For those on our call today for a joint event who may be unfamiliar with APA, It's APA Leadership and Educational Facilities, and we've been in existence for a little over 100 years. And our purpose as an organization is to provide education, research, training, and information, and also serve as a clearinghouse for the practice of educational facilities. We have over 1,200 member institutions throughout the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, and about 15,000 individuals from those institutions are actively engaged in our organization, along with over 300 business partners as well that support our programs and services. Our purpose, again, is to seek and create positive impact in educational facilities, elevate the profession, and also transform member institutions into more inviting and supportive learning environments. And the next slide we'll share is just a little bit of information about APA's standards program. APA has a Standards and Codes Council, and you see the members listed here, including, I believe, Alan Sachter, who serves as a director, I believe, on the board for CCFS, and has done a lot of work for them for many years. Among the things that we do through the Codes Council, APA serves as an ANSI-accredited standards organization. We're presently producing American National Standards for total cost of ownership for facilities and infrastructure, a suite of standards, the first of which has been published back in February, and the second one on implementation of TCO is coming out early next year. And in addition to ANSI-accredited standards, we also have various work groups that are involved in tracking activities in NFPA codes, also the ICC or I codes. Group A at this moment is something that we're looking at very carefully at, and providing our members with opportunities to participate in these work groups, learn more about the codes, and also how they can influence and impact outcomes with those various standards bodies. And I want to say the most recent activity we've been involved in, and there's a webinar to this effect on the APA website, is around NFPA 3000, which is a new standard that NFPA is now aggressively working on that deals or addresses active shooter incidents. And if you have an opportunity to visit our website, look at our archived webinar listing, you'll see some more information about that. So I'd like to turn it back over to Justin at this time.
Thanks, John. As I mentioned before, the center does regularly provides webinars to our members free of charge. These webinars are provided or brought to you by our Codes and Standards Committee, which is currently chaired by Richard Roberts from Honeywell Fire and Security. The Codes and Standards Committee is charged with assessing and promoting proposals for changes in national model codes, industry, and reference standards as they relate to college and university infrastructures. We also have a number of other committees, including the Professional Development, Education, and Events Committee, which is chaired by myself. We're responsible for providing information on what our members would like to hear in a webinar and what they would like to see at our annual forum coming in November. On the next slide, if you would like to participate in a committee and you're already a member of the center, you can go to the center's website, and there's information there on how to join committees, or you can contact Kathy at the number on the screen, or the support team at campusfiresafety.org.
And again, this is John, just to talk a little bit about APA. I already mentioned a little bit about our codes program. You can learn more about it at www.apa.org/standards. And if you are an APA member institution, or are an employee with a APA member institution, particularly in the facilities organization, we'd love to have you engage in our various work groups and activities. You can reach out to me directly at john@apa.org, or Billy Zidek, our Standards and Codes Administrator, and she can be reached at billy@apa.org. And now, before we start today's webinar, we just want to make sure that we cover a couple of logistical items with you. If you could just make sure that your microphone, well, you should know that your microphone is automatically muted. If you have a question, if you could please type it in the question box, which should be in the control panel found on your screen. You can certainly submit questions at any time, and at the end of today's session, we're going to take about 10 minutes to go through some of those questions and do some Q&A back and forth with Roger, our presenter today. The presentation is going to be available on the Center for Campus Fire Safety website, and also the APA website as well. There will be an archived version along with the PowerPoint and other information available to you. We also want to point out that there are continuing educational credits that are available for this webinar through the International Codes Council, through CCFS at point, I believe that for today's it's 0.1 CEU. Other credits through APA are available, which include the professional development hour, 1 professional development hour, which is equal to 1/10 of a CEU as well. Learning units through the American Institute of Architects, continuing educational systems is available as well. This program counts as 1 learning unit. Also 5 APA units towards the APA CEFP credential. And again, it mentions again the AIA learning unit as well on this slide. Okay, Justin.
Thanks, John. Now to welcome our presenter, Roger Reiswig. Roger is on our board of directors at the Center for Campus Fire Safety. He has been with Johnson Controls, previously known as Simplex Grinnell, for over 31 years. Now Vice President of Industry Relations for Johnson Controls. Represents Johnson Controls on various codes and standards committees, as well as serving on various association and organization boards and committees, such as the Center for Campus Fire Safety. Currently serves as Vice President of the Board of Directors for the AFAA, Vice Chair of NEMA Signaling Section. I believe Roger's at NEMA right now. Chair of the Standards Committee for NEMA, serves on our Codes and Standards Committee, and Roger also served as chair for the creation of the NEMA document, Communication Systems for Life Safety in Schools. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Roger.
Well, thank you, Justin, and everyone, and welcome to those. Good afternoon, good morning, depending upon where you are. As you just saw a little bit ago, I've been with Johnson Controls Simplex for a pretty long time now, and in my position, I'm able to do a lot of work within the industry. I work a lot with NFPA, with the Fire Protection Research Foundation, and the like. And as we were talking and about maybe a different webinar we could bring today to the group, we started talking about the low frequency sounders, or also known as the 520 hertz sounders. And there's still a little bit of confusion in the industry, and some knowledge that still needs to be disseminated out there and how it's being implemented. So we thought today would be a good day to maybe go ahead and do a little bit of a refresher and an update now that we're kind of in the heat of the throes, if you will, of what's going on with this. Go ahead, next slide. And but as we look at this low frequency sounder issue within 72, the 520 hertz square wave is a component of that. And I just wanted to take a second and highlight that, because as you're looking through the code, you might be looking around saying, where does it say that I have to put in 520 hertz sounders? Well, really in the code, it defines it underneath of the low frequency sounders. So if you're in chapter 18 of 72, or you're in 101 of the I codes, and you're looking in there, you're going to see the terminology referencing low frequency sounders, not necessarily 520 hertz tone. So I just kind of wanted to point that out before we jump into this. But go ahead, next slide. So what was happening, or what continues to happening in the United States, is we've seen, and I say we, the Fire Protection Research Foundation and NFPA has seen a little bit of a trend happening in the recent decades, where people were perishing or not being alerted to our traditional smoke alarms in our 1 and 2 family dwelling units. What's been happening is people perishing in our homes, or not being alerted. And you say, well, how do you know that? Well, for the people that weren't being alerted but did survive, we're able to do interviews with them, and ask them, well, how did you end up getting out of the house, or when did you finally wake up, or become alerted? And in a few cases, they didn't even mentioning the smoke alarms, and in other cases where people had perished in their beds or laying on a couch or what have you. And we were able to go in and do forensic analysis, take the smoke alarms down. They're in a big molted, plastic mess, but you can take it apart and you can see how the soot propagated around the sounder. So you knew the device was working, and the way that the sound waves were propagating out and the soot collected onto the device, that you knew it was doing what it was supposed to be doing. So then it begged the question on how can people either not be alerted or not being awakened to our smoke alarms when they're putting them where we tell them to put them, changing the batteries out, replacing the devices every 10 years like they're supposed to for smoke alarms. What's going on in some of these facilities? So that's what kind of prompted all of this. So NFPA has a wing under them, if you will, a separate division called the Fire Protection Research Foundation. NFPA gave them an endowment maybe 30 or some odd years ago, and they use part of that endowment every year and then a lot of sponsorships to do various projects for the fire alarm industry, mass notification, sprinklers, portable extinguishers, and it just goes on and on. Anything to do with any NFPA document that they need substantiation for a change or technology or whatever is going to be added or modified in the documents, you need substantiation. So NFPA then turns to the Research Foundation and says, can you go provide us that data that we need? So with that, the Research Foundation went into action. And as you see on the slide here, some of the information they started to pull together. They started to look at and said, we're starting to see people not being alerted. One of these fatal fires occurring in our residential occupancies. And they're finding, as you see there, that half of our fatal fires occur between 11 and 7, 11 at night and 7 in the morning, typically when we're asleep. And 35% of the victims that were succumb were sleeping. Some other information or data was collected from Gallaudet University. There is probably more of you know than I on this particular call. Gallaudet's the largest university in the world that has the massive bulk of the population that has some type of disability, physical disability, cognitive disability, or combination thereof. And they estimate about 7 million people are not likely to hear a smoke alarm regardless of their waking state, which again was kind of an eye-opener when we look at this from a life safety code-making perspective. And they have 43.5 million will not necessarily hear it at all of the time due to having a severe hearing impairment or being functionally deaf. And then with some of the other things that come out were certain segments of our population have issues with hearing certain frequencies of alarms. And you look at when we're born. When we're born, it takes a few years for our ears to finish developing. And in many cases, it's not until we're, in our mid-teenage years, around 15 years or so, that our ears are finally finished developing for the higher frequencies. The lower frequencies develop first and then to the higher. And as I look at that, it kind of explains to me when I look at my two daughters as they were growing up, and our alarm clock would go off in the morning, and it's beeping, beep, 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 and I hear it in my bedroom, and I go in and I say, Rebecca, why are you not waking up to your alarm clock? And she says, Daddy, I never heard it. I was like, okay, well, now the research is kind of proving that out, that, okay, the higher frequency is not alerting people. And also it goes the other side. As we get older, we tend to lose part of our hearing, not all of our hearing, but we lose a certain frequency range. And that frequency range typically is a higher frequency. So people that are older and younger, fall into this category. So let's go to the next slide. So with that, we start to look at some of the research then that got conducted. So the Research Foundation itself is more of a repository, a organizer of this research, and they typically will form a technical advisory committee, and then they will solicit proposals from the public sector and private sector for people to maybe conduct this research that the Research Foundation is looking for. I actually was very intimate with this project. I was both on the technical advisory committee and did a lot of work as this was going along, reviewing the work that was done. And I currently serve as a trustee for the foundation, the Research Foundation now. So I'm pretty involved with this group. So what happened is they were looking around and trying to find an organization, an entity that conduct this kind of research. Came across this Victoria University in Australia. And, they're known, they have a Center for Environmental Safety and Risk Engineering, but they also have a School of Psychology. And within this grouping, they had a sleep center. And the sleep center at Victoria University studies how long it takes for people to fall asleep, the levels of sleep that they're in, how long they're in different levels of sleep, and then what it takes for them to be awakened out of a heavy sleep, a light sleep, what have you. And as we were looking at the criteria of what we wanted to do, this seemed like a perfect fit. They're out there already doing a lot of this work. They know nothing about fire alarm and signaling, which was perfectly fine. And we kind of went to them and presented them, what's going on that we're observing, and it was just a great fit. So they took and at their sleep center, they brought in people and had people that were young, were old, were male, female, people that said they were deaf, people that proclaimed that they had normal hearing, people that were willing to take a couple of drinks of alcohol before they went to sleep. And so they had a big cross-section of people. And then they used different frequencies to try to alert these people. And they started out with their traditional higher frequency that everybody in the industry has been using for a while now. The higher frequencies around the 3,000, 3,400 hertz range. It's the piezoelectric devices, the kind of the high-pitched sound that we hear out of our old alarm clocks or our single station smoke alarms, or the single gang plates that tie into the fire alarm, the piezoelectric. So they did studies with that. They did 3,400, 3,000 hertz, 2,500, 2,000 hertz. And they were finding, surprisingly, not a lot of people were being awakened to the traditional high frequency alarm. And when they lowered the frequency down and they got down to like a sweet spot of the 520 hertz range, that's when it was like a hockey stick effect. It just kind of spiked. And as you see there, 92% of all the occupants were awakened, or the sleep center occupants were awakened in this study. And it was very, kind of a telling thing there. And 75 decibel is the decibel required of a signaling appliance tied to a fire alarm control unit that it needs to produce, the sound level. So, and then if they increase that volume or sound pressure to 95 decibel, 100% of the people were awakened. And what's interesting about this is even at the 92%, this is the whole population, right? Men, women, old, young, people that said they were deaf. And a lot of people that are quote unquote deaf can still hear a low frequency. And I do a lot of work in my private life with a large population of people that are deaf, and a lot of them have hearing aids. And as I do sign language with them, I'll ask them about, why do you have a hearing aid if you're deaf? And, just trying to learn. And they say, well, Roger, I'm not 100% deaf. I can still hear, low frequencies. I can hear the boom of maybe a movie when a rocket, is going off, or fireworks, or maybe a band is playing, and I can hear the drums. It's like, oh, well, that makes sense. And then again, the research kind of proves that out. So let's go to the next slide. So a lot of this information then was pulled together, culminated, and then presented to the NFPA 72 committees and said, here's some information that you might want to take and do some work with. And the committees were given all this information that I pretty much have just laid out for you, and a whole lot more in pretty good detail, and gave the findings. And the committee focused on this, and they said, we need to look at how we're alerting people in sleeping areas. And subsequently, all this happened like in the 2007, 2008 timeframe, and then it was implemented into the 2010 edition of 72. And, we look in our world today, and when we try to find things, what can I do to save lives or make things better, or would this work? And, and this is one of the things that we can point to and say emphatically, this is something that we can do today to save lives, no question. And that's where the committees kind of stood up and said, we need to take action. So let's go to the next slide. And they did that. The Chapter 18 committee now in 2010 edition is our notification appliance committee. They do everything to do with notification appliances for strobes, horns, speakers, all revolves around that in Chapter 18. So they said where audible appliances sounders are provided to produce signals for sleeping areas, they shall produce a low frequency alarm signal that complies with the following. And then that's where you get into the low frequency definition of 520 hertz square wave and the like. Now you see there's an effective date that was put in starting in the 2010 edition of January 1, 2014. And that's there, and I just want to point that out, that when you go back in time a little bit here, the manufacturing community, and I'll speak as one of those people, we had no idea what this low frequency sound thing was that was being presented. So we had to go and manufacture product. We had to create product, do R&D, what's the best way to do it. And then UL also got triggered. And UL said, we need to come up with a way to test this so that we can get product listed. So the industry needed time to catch up. So NFPA at 72 committee said, let's give the industry a cycle. Which is typically 3 years for committees to do work on their respective documents. And that's where the January 2014 date came from. Now, that's come and gone. And I bring that up because almost everywhere in the United States, they're either under the 2010 or the 2013 edition of 72. A few are under the 2016 edition. And, of course, the federal government outside of CMS, Center for Medicaid, Medicare, they're typically under whatever the latest published edition is. So even if you're under the 2010 edition of 72, this date's come and gone, so it would now be a requirement. So one of the things I also want to highlight on this slide is Chapter 18 is for signaling appliances that tie to your fire alarm control unit, right? So they're for our sounders that are out there making the noise after the smoke detectors or pull stations are activated. Now, Chapter 29, down there on the bottom, Chapter 29 took a little bit different approach. Chapter 29 is single station, multi-station, and household fire warning equipment. So it's for your smoke alarms. They took a different stance, and they said for people with mild to severe hearing loss, which is defined in 72, notification appliances provided for those with mild to severe hearing loss shall comply with the low frequency sounders, 520 hertz. So it's interesting that you have a little bit of a disparity here. You have Chapter 18 who says anywhere there's sleeping areas and I have to put in a device that's tied to the fire alarm, it's got to be low frequency. I don't care about the occupant. It all has to do with the room that I'm doing. Where Chapter 29 said, if you're going to put a smoke alarm in, well, they only need to be low frequency if the person's going to be deaf or hard of hearing. So, and it's a little bit of a, and I got to watch maybe how I'm saying it here, but it's a little bit of a correlation issue, I believe, where I go into a hotel room, let's just say, and in the hotel room, I need a sounder in the room to give 75 decibel at the pillow for the person that's sleeping there. So the committee says, okay, low frequency, make sure they're awake. But yet the smoke alarm in the room doesn't have to comply with that unless the person self-identifies and says that I'm a person that is deaf or hard of hearing. But I told you earlier that this isn't just affecting people that are deaf and hard of hearing. So Roger, get off the soapbox for a minute, but that's where the confusion is coming into play between Chapter 18 and Chapter 29. So let's continue on here. So when we talk about these places that are sleeping areas, it's what we generally think of: hotels, motels, apartment condominiums, college, universities, our dormitories, retirement assisted living facilities. It can be in hospitals where I have a hospital and my doctors that are on staff are on 48-hour shifts and they need to have sleep periods. Well, when they take their sleep periods in the designated sleeping area, well, that's now required to have low frequency sounders to awaken that person. Same if I'm in a firehouse. My firehouse has sleeping areas for my firefighters, first responders to go and take sleep breaks. Well, that area then needs to have low frequency sounders. So, but you aren't required to have those low frequency sounders everywhere. So in your lobbies, hallways, meeting rooms, places that people are generally awake or supposed to be awake, you're not required to have that low frequency component. In a hospital here, I have it marked as not required, because typically a hospital, you're going to make that facility, or it should be, in private mode signaling. I'm in the hospital, I'm there because I have some kind of a problem or I just had an operation. Well, why have a sounder go off and say, and alert me that I need to evacuate when I can't evacuate? They told me to stay in the hospital bed. So you typically do private mode signaling, where you send the signal to the nurse's station, duty desk, or end of hallway, wherever, and then they'll take appropriate action. Same in detention facilities, correctional facilities, and what have you. But let's go to the next slide. And as we move on, and here are the requirements. We're often asked about, well, what about upgrades or retrofits? Well, and I just wanted to point out here that the requirements are in 72 now, and they're also in the I code, and as well as NFPA 101. But typically those documents, with a few exceptions, are not retroactive. Now, sometimes when you do certain upgrades, depending upon where you are in the U.S., they're triggered when you have to do an upgrade to your fire alarm alerting system, and that can be by percentage of the system that I'm replacing, if I'm touching the fire alarm control unit, or a percentage of the building that I'm renovating. So there's different triggers and permitting that comes into play. But again, that's based on wherever you are throughout the U.S. So in general, it's not retroactive. But as with anything, it could be, something that your local area does require. And we will always say go back and refer to your local AHJ. Next slide for any compliance or local changes. So again, Chapter 18 makes no specific mention of a disability requirement, right? This isn't about putting these in certain rooms that are my ADA rooms or handicap rooms or accessible rooms. Chapter 18 said, I'll give you a little bit of insight. So we're sitting at the committee, right? And we have a group of people around the table from all facets of the industry, enforcers, AHJs, special experts, manufacturers, installer maintainers, etc. And they're aware of what happened in Chapter 29. People have to self-identify. But around the committee, they said, and I'll just say it. They said in the committee, what guy is going to walk up to a front desk and say, oh, I'm hard of hearing, I need one of those rooms that has low frequency sounders, so if the alarm goes off, I'll be sure to awaken. Typically, guys aren't going to do that. And this is just fact. This is what they said around the committee. So they backed up and they said, you know what, because of that, and we don't know who the population is in our rooms from night to night, and this is a problem with people that aren't just hard of hearing, right? If people that are old, people that are young, people that maybe had, went out to eat dinner the night and had a couple of drinks. We want to make sure that we're awakening all of these people. So Chapter 18 said, I don't care who's in the room, put low frequency sounders everywhere. And then you see the components there, where it's going to be a square wave, 520 hertz, plus or minus 10%. But go on the next slide. As we're moving along here. And Chapter 24 comes into play. So Chapter 24 is anything to do with voice in my fire alarm life safety system is in Chapter 24. So if it has speakers, it's in 24. That includes one-way fire alarm voice evacuation. It's not in protected premises any longer. It's now in Chapter 24. My area of refuge, Chapter 24. Mass notification, firefighters' telephones, elevator communication systems. All of that is in Chapter 24. So that's why it's called emergency communications. So within there, they were looking at this requirement and they said, well, if we're going to have audible messages that come out and play to tell people what to do in the event of an emergency, we need to make sure that these people are awakened as well. So if you have speakers in your system and not horns, what they've done in Chapter 24 is said, if you're going to have in these sleeping areas and you have speakers, you got to play a low frequency tone and then play your voice message. So instead of the old traditional whoop, whoop, your attention please, now it's going to be bong, bong with a low frequency sound to get somebody's attention and wake them up, and then play the voice message that has to be done over the speakers. So it made sense, right? That we want to make sure that we're alerting these people. So if you're involved in new construction or renovation and you start to hear the fire alarm system that has a voice system installed, not do the traditional whoop, whoop, but they're starting to do a low frequency bong, bong in your sleeping areas, that's where that's coming from. That's now a requirement that we need to adhere to, whether you're under 2010, 2013, or 2016. And further, in occupancies where sleeping accommodations are provided, this pre-alert tone needs to be a low frequency. And the pre-alert's that attention getter, preamble, it's called a lot of different things. But it's that bong bong, and then start to play the message. Next slide. So again, Chapter 29, a little bit different take. Single station, multi-station, household fire alarm warning systems. Now, just to back up for terminology, a smoke alarm is a device that has a smoke detector, a power supply, and a notification appliance all in one package. And we call that a smoke alarm. A smoke detector is a device that goes on the ceiling or the wall, detects smoke, and sends a signal back to the control unit, and then the control unit decides, do I turn on the sirens, the lights, whatever I need to do, elevator recall, what have you. So terminology makes a big difference. When we get the phone calls and they say, hey, my smoke alarm is doing this, it means a different thing to us in the industry when we hear that. The smoke alarm is what you go and buy at a big box store, Walmart, Home Depot, Lowe's, or what have you, as opposed to a smoke detector that you will buy from a manufacturer. So again, they talk about people with hearing loss, mild to severe hearing loss, and did a little bit of work with the Acoustical Societies of America and defined what these are, what these mean, these moderate to severe hearing losses. And they require in Chapter 29 that notification appliance is provided in sleeping rooms and guest rooms for those with hearing loss. So again, it doesn't specify the room as much as it does the person in the room, that you need to have this low frequency sounder. So go ahead, next slide. So the code clearly states that the intent's to awaken people, and that's what it all boils back to, right? When I first started with this and gave you all that information up front about why was this project even being undertaken, because people weren't being awakened when they were sleeping to fires from their smoke alarms. And the code tries to address or to help make that happen now. The signal is not required in other areas, in our lobbies, hallways, meeting rooms, places that people should be awake. Now, take an example for a college classroom. Well, yes, you might have students sleeping in there, but they're not supposed to be sleeping in there. So it's not a designated sleeping area. Thus, it's not required to have a low frequency sounder in those rooms. But people will say, well, wait a minute, doesn't 72 say that I have to have the same signal everywhere in the facility? Well, it's partially true. 72 says the signal, the audible signal, needs to be synchronized. Just like we synchronize our strobes, we need to make sure that the signal is the same signal synchronized or together in an area to avoid confusion. So the audible is the same exact way. If I'm beating out the temporal 3, bong, 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 I need to have that cadence synchronized across my devices in an area. Excuse me. And so with that, the code is silent though on the frequency that needs to happen in the same areas. So there's not a requirement that says low frequency has to be used everywhere, high frequency used everywhere. You can't mix the two. You can definitely mix the two as long as the cadence, the pattern is the same. So in chapter 18, you'll see the terminology called audio or audible synchronization, just like we have for strobes. So there is not a requirement that the sound has to be the same. You actually could use a chime and a horn tone in the same area as long as the cadence or pattern was the same and be in compliance with 72. So next slide. So as we do this, we say, okay, well, so what's the big deal about what you're talking about here? So non-voice appliances, horns, now have a listing that we need to comply with, right? UL 464, our standard for audible signaling appliances, has been modified and now has inclusion in it for me to have a component to be tested for low frequency. And when I submit a device to UL for various listing standards that they have, take for example 464 here, not all of my devices need to comply with low frequency, only those devices that provide low frequency sound. So that section was added to the listing document, and then if I have a device that creates or can create a low frequency component, then UL will test it to that. And I'm pointing all of this out because you're going to have a device that's a high frequency device made to only go in the hallways and be UL 464 listed, but it does not mean that it has a low frequency component tied with that. So, but now that that's there, and when I submit a product, I have to check the box and say, also test this device for low frequency sound. Same with my smoke alarms. My smoke alarm document, UL 217, that I get listed to, has the same low frequency component testing built into it, provided I have a device that I want to get listed to that standard. So the other big deal about all of this is with these low frequency sounders, low frequency, you can't change the rules or laws of physics. The lower the frequency of something that I'm driving, the more power that it takes to do that. If you're doing audio at your home or in your vehicle and you want to put in a nice sound system, well, you put in the tweeters or the mid-range, you put in some smaller wire, little amplifier, sounds fine. But as soon as you want to put in those, the bass or the woofers, and you want the sound, the pop or the boom, you got to put in bigger cable. The audio guys will tell you, you need to put in that monster cable, but then they'll also say you need some big amplifier to drive that. You need power to drive that. The exact same thing holds true in the fire alarm world. Once now that I've gone to these low frequency sounders, I need to have more power to push them. I say all of that because as you see there in the bulletin, in my bullet, the current draw with some devices can be almost 5 times as high as the standard devices that we've been using for years now, the piezo devices, the higher 3,000 hertz devices. So if you're doing a new project, some people have said, well, let's just put in low frequency everywhere. My sleeping areas and the hallways, just put them everywhere and be done with it. Well, you can do that, then that's fine. But what you've also added to the job is a lot more cost and installation and maintenance to the project, because I need more power to run these systems. I need more batteries. I need more notification appliance circuits. The devices themselves cost a little bit more money, to do that. So you've kind of put a little bit of an overbearing burden onto the project by just blatantly saying, put these low frequency everywhere. So what we say as designers, as manufacturers, just put the low frequency where you need them. Don't put them everywhere, because you don't want to raise the cost more than it already has been raised to make this happen. And these issues, they combine, together can be a costly code-compliant design. And then also, but for voice, it's a little bit different with fire alarm. With voice, our speakers are already tapped at 0.5 watt, 1 watt, 1/4 watt, or what have you. And we have amplifiers already sized, accordingly, and then we have our audio controller to drive it. And I'll just speak in generalities for the industry. We have audio controllers, which, for all intents and purpose, it's an iPhone, and I'm playing MP3 files through that device out to my amplifier and into the speakers. I'm saying that because in many cases, if you have an existing voice fire alarm system, a lot of manufacturers, you can go back to them and just say, can you upgrade or add a new MP3 file to my audio controller, or iPod, if you will, and play that and allow me to conform with this low frequency component. And in many cases, you can do that. You can, if so, because another question you maybe are starting to ask yourself right now is, well, gee, based on everything you've just told me, it makes sense, or it behooves me to add in this low frequency component, even though I might not be required to do it, because it makes sense to make sure I'm alerting people and there's no retroactive requirement. Well, if it's horns, it's a little bit difficult because you can't do a one-for-one replacement. It takes a lot more power to make that happen. So I can't just do one-for-one. But if I have a voice fire alarm, it's actually relatively easy to do. And I would, kind of urge a lot of you out there, if you have voice in your dormitories and a voice fire alarm, talk to your manufacturer, talk to your installer dealer, and probably for not that much money, have them come in, put in the new audio file into your controller, do it in the same time frame as when you're doing your fire alarm test, because when I download files to the system, I got to verify that they work. So don't, call the person in to test your system twice. If they're going to test your system in July of the year, have them come in June, add the new audio file, and then you can immediately have this proven way of alerting people implemented right away for pretty cheap money. And I know it's a whole lot that I'm throwing at you. If you go to the next slide, kind of wraps up for our slides, for this. And we've left a little bit of time for questions, but hopefully it kind of clears up, or maybe has other questions that have popped into your head. And with that, I'll open it up if there's anything that anybody would like to ask, or Kathy, Justin.
Hey, Roger. Yeah, this is Justin. We do have a few questions here. Great job. We do have a few questions here. So I'm just going to go through them. Some of you may have answered. Where do areas with people wearing hearing protection fit in?
Well, that's a good question. With hearing protection, hopefully when they're wearing hearing protection, it's because they're in an area that's manufacturing or other machinery is running and they are awake and they're not asleep. Again, this low frequency component issue is just for those people or areas where people are to be sleeping. And if they are wearing hearing protection, then we're obviously going to have strobe lights to alert those people. And in a lot of cases, they'll also add in maybe some type of a rotating beacon or a different color or some other device to alert those people as well. But for at least for this application, there would be no difference for people with hearing protection.
All right. So shout out to our friends from Canada. Brent Hurd wants to know if this applies to Canada.
Yeah. So I don't know if the Canadian code, the Canadian Building Code, has added this in or not. The research is there and has proven it out. I know a lot of manufacturers have device appliances that are both listed for UL and ULC, UL Canada. Again, I don't know what's required, but based on the research that's happened and the materials that are available, there's no reason why you couldn't install it. But I'm sorry, I just don't know what Canada has required.
Okay. Let me see here. What are the requirements for replacing smoke alarms in existing buildings in our facilities?
Okay, so smoke alarms, since the late 1970s, have a life expectancy or a life range, and they must be replaced every 10 years from the date of manufacture, not from the date when they were installed. So there's a requirement in place that on the device itself, we must put in the date of manufacture, at least a month in the year, and you have 10 years for that to be in service. With that, with smoke alarms, because they have to be replaced every 10 years, there's no requirement for sensitivity testing. So this was kind of the trade-off on the codes. If you don't have to do sensitivity testing, but just do the push the button or blow smoke into the device and make sure it works, and that's it, well, then the trade-off's going to be you got to replace it every 10 years. There is now a end-of-life signal that needs to be added to these devices, and you're also seeing the same thing with carbon monoxide devices. And they typically last 5 years, 7 year, or 10 year based on the manufacturer. And for those of you out there who have some of these newer smoke alarms, they start to beep, once every few minutes. That means it's got a low battery. If you go in, you put a new battery in it, but hey, it's still beeping. Check it out, because it might be end of life, and it might be beeping not because it's low battery, but it might be beeping because it's its end of life. But again, that's 10 years, and it's got to be stamped on the device itself when it was manufactured.
All right. Next question. In a hotel where you may have a bedroom and a living area or a suite, would you want the low frequency in the living area?
Yeah, so that would be up to you. You would definitely need it in the bedroom if it had a door, and to make sure it was 75 at the dB at the pillow. In the suite area, I would say it's kind of up to you. It would depend. But if there is a sleep couch there or a pull-out sleeper sofa, then it would be a requirement. Again, low frequency for the rooms that are for sleeping areas. So again, that would be my it depends answer.
Okay. Next question I'll summarize. Are there syncing issues between corridor horns and low-frequency sounders in sleeping rooms?
Well, there can be. In our rooms, if we're going to use low-frequency sounders, if you're installing them, sometimes they might put all the rooms on one separate notification appliance circuit and the ones in the hallways on a different appliance circuit. Many manufacturers have the ability to synchronize across the power supply. So as I tie them all back to one central location, it's pretty easy to synchronize those. But it is something that you need to be aware of, and it is a good question. And if you're involved in a project where they are going to have high frequency in the hallways, low frequency in the room, I would definitely make sure and ask that question. But then it also comes down to, and maybe this is a little bit more information than you wanted, but it comes down to we have alerting zones or notification zones, and we have signaling zones. Notification zones are made up of signaling zones. Signaling zones are my notification appliance circuit, my hardwired circuit out to the devices. Well, multiples of those circuits can create a notification zone. A notification zone could be a floor. Well, there is argument that's saying, well, a notification zone could be the room, and another notification zone could be the hallway. And code says you need to synchronize within the notification zone, not the. So some people are saying, well, if I open up the door from the room to the hallway, just for those couple of seconds while I'm egressing out of the room into the hallway, the pattern might be different, but that's two different notification zones. Again, that's up to the interpretation, and I'm probably giving you a whole lot more than you wanted to know about that one, but it's relatively easy for almost every manufacturer to synchronize both high and low frequency, I guess is the way to answer that one.
Okay. Let me see here. One person indicates that Canada has not yet required low frequency, but it's under discussion.
Okay.
Not sure if that's true or not. Yeah. What about industrial facilities such as residential camps and oil and gas fields or other buildings?
Yeah, great question. So if I'm in a camp area, and again, this has to do if I have a fire alarm system. So there are some camp areas that may not require a fire alarm. Again, it depends on how big the area is or how many rooms they have. It might just require a sprinkler system and smoke alarms. And again, the smoke alarms, Chapter 29, says for the people that self-identify and say, hey, I'm hard of hearing, give me a low-frequency device. But if there is a building fire alarm system and I have designated sleeping areas in that facility, then yes, I would be required to put in those low-frequency sounders.
Okay. This one says, please expand on the requirement for 520 in a hotel apartment with regards to Annex 18453, which states specifically a couch as a sleeping area. I think we talked about this a little bit. Is there anything else you want to say about that, Roger?
Right. Well, not a whole lot else to say, and that's in the annex, as somebody duly pointed out. And the annex is nice to know information or things to think about that we don't codify. So, and that's up to interpretation, right? Because some people will say, well, it's a couch, and couch is a place that people can sleep, and therefore you need to put in low frequency sounder. Others will say, well, that's not true unless it's a pull-out couch or a sleep couch, and that's why it's in the annex, because it's put in there to say it may or may not. It depends thing, and it comes down to interpretation.
Okay, so I've got one more question here, and then I think it's about time to wrap up. This individual wants to know about CO alarms. Are we just talking about smoke, or would this also apply for CO?
You know what? That's a great question, and I should have added that in. In the latest edition of NFPA 720, which is the document for carbon monoxide systems and alarms, they now require this low frequency component for carbon monoxide. And again, to make sure people are being alerted and are awakened to that. So whoever asked that question, hats off to you, because you're exactly right. This is not just for smoke alarms, smoke detectors, it's also for carbon monoxide. So yes, very, very good.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Roger. John, do you have anything else?
No, I'm looking at the question list, and it looks like you've captured them all, Justin. Thank you.
Okay. Well, Kathy, do you have anything?
No, I just to say thank you to everyone that attended, and thank you, Roger, for your time. It was a great presentation. I enjoyed it.
All right, I appreciate it. I just see Bob Schifoletti told me here that Chapter 18 requires low frequency in any area where someone might be sleeping. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Bob. All right, so thank you very much.
Well, thank you, everyone, for attending.
Yes, and Roger, on behalf of APA, thank you for being part of this program today, and much thanks to the Center for Campus Fire Safety. This has been a wonderful joint program, and I believe, Kathy, your organization is going to post the archived version of this event as well on its website, as will APA.
We will, and we'll send. There were a couple of questions that came in on how they get their learning credits. The center will email the ICC recertification CEU directly to each participant. It takes a couple of weeks, but we'll send.
Very good, and I know APA will do a similar follow-up as well. So thank you all, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Have a pleasant rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.